All right, let me share my screen. All right, can everybody see my screen?
Yep, I can see it.
Yes.
Okay. All right, let's go and, oop, not calendar. All right, let's give everybody just one more minute. Okay, resources, office hours, code repositories, week 1, week 2, okay. All right, let's get started. All right, welcome everybody. Let's see, we are in the second week of web development. Second week, second day of web development, and we covered in the last couple of days. We covered the first assignment. We got you going. I believe we covered quite a bit of material that will help you get through the first assignment. You do have the rest of this week and the weekend to complete it, and it'll be due on February 1st. So that's I believe next Monday. Me demoing the technology of using HTML, using CSS, using Bootstrap. I would like to step back a little bit and cover, formally some of this this material, after having demonstrated, hands-on live coding. Let's step back a little bit and make sure we covered all the topics, all the various things, and make sure that we didn't leave out anything. Right. Also, I'd like to discuss the project that the final project that will be due at the end of the semester. Right? So we are building together a throughout multiple assignments. We are building a project. We're building an application from scratch all the way through using multiple technologies, multiple tiers, multiple repositories and servers that collaborate with one another to provide a single application. And the application that we're building is a online learning management system that is split up into two halves. So the first half is it's targeted towards the faculty that allow the application allows the faculty to create content. Right, they're able to navigate to a dashboard, select the course that they want to work on, right, and then add multiple modules, and then add widgets to those modules. So that's sort of what we're building. Not quite the same, obviously, but that's the focus of the first half of the semester. The second half of the semester is going to focus more on the student's point of view. How do they use the learning management system, right? Obviously, they can't create content, certainly that they can consume content, right? So that'll be the second half of the semester. Right? So that's that, and you're working on your own, obviously with my help and the source code that we give you. You then go on and complete it. But then there's a final project that you're going to be working together with other teammates, and I would like to go over some of those final project requirements. Make sure that everybody's on board on what is the purpose of the final project and how is it distinct from the assignment. All right, so that's the plan for today. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure, what's up?
Start like when would you recommend to start the final project? Like right away, or like I don't know, in the middle of the
yeah,
semester?
so ideally you would get started right away, at least forming the teams and coming up with a common theme of what it is that you folks want to work on. And the earlier you have that settled, the earlier you can start prototyping and exploring multiple options. The longer you wait, those options start to be reduced. Ideally you would follow more or less the cadence. I'm sorry?
The process that we're doing right now.
Yeah, so for instance, what we're doing in the first assignment is creating like a prototype, right? Where oftentimes when you go out to clients, they want to see what it is that you plan on building, and you create these very thin, very simple prototypes that don't really do anything. They're static, and they're very useful for the client to visualize what it is that we're going to be building before we commit to actually building the back end and databases and all that. You first create a thin prototype, very simple prototype, perhaps even just draw it on a whiteboard or with Photoshop or PowerPoint, or even some really simple HTML you put together with Bootstrap. And then you let your end users play around with it, and it's a good discussion piece of saying, oh, well, why don't we move this here, move this over there, and then, or how about the layout is a little bit different, or the flow of the application is different. So this is very useful to create these early on these prototypes. So you already know how to do that, right? At least by the end of this assignment, you should be able to start creating some wireframes, some prototypes of what it is that you want to accomplish at the end of the semester. Also, one of the more challenging parts of the assignment, of the project, as you'll see in a minute, is identifying a third-party API where you can retrieve some live data that you can build a project around, okay? And so that's one of the more challenging, I think that has the biggest risk, technology risk, and usually, whenever you're building any project, you want to identify what is the biggest risk factor of building any application, and you want to tackle that part first, right? That you make sure that it's going to work out. It's what you were looking for. It's going to be it's going to fulfill all the requirements of whatever project you're building. And once you feel confident that indeed it is what you were looking for, it's going to meet your requirements, then you prototype it, you build some simple application around that just to test out that you know how to use it and whatnot. Let's see something on the chat. What is an example of a risk? Yeah, so for instance, with the example of the risk that I mentioned just now, right? The one of them is the the requirements, for instance, state that your API needs to do two things at least. Or one of them is that you can query the API with some parameters, and then it can come back with the results. And the other one is that given some unique identifier of a particular object, can you give me more details about a particular object? So those most APIs will have something like that, but you want to make sure that it allows you to do that, right? But not all APIs. Other things is that some APIs can be accessed directly from the browser, but some APIs can only be accessed from a server. It is significantly easier to use APIs that can be accessed directly from the browser. If you want to go through the server, then you need to create a server proxy. You have to create all sorts of things. Those kinds of things we are going to be discussing. But you want to know these things as early as possible because they might complicate the building of the project, and you're going to be assuming several things, and right at the end of the semester you're going to say, oh, I realized that API that I chose is not exactly what I needed. As early as possible you can discover those kinds of questions, answer those questions, the better confidence you'll have. Is there a proposed timeline somewhere on Canvas of what steps in the project we should have done by when? Yes, there are. I'm going to make available a couple of milestone assignments that are going to give suggestions of where you should be by what time. Okay, they're not going to be enforced, so you're going to be you're still going to be responsible for following these milestones, but we're not going to enforce them, right? It's really going to be your responsibility that to self-govern that. Okay. Okay. The progress. No, you do not need to update myself about the progress. I mean, if you want to leave it to the last week, that's up to you. Obviously, I am suggesting that you get started as early as possible and you do not leave this till the end, right? I am going to implement a pseudo prototype project in one of our through several lectures, halfway through our course, and we'll build a little prototype of a project that meets some of the more advanced, some of the more riskier issues, some of the most complex requirements, and so that you could take that as a starting point, perhaps, for your own project. I mean, even the assignment, you could use it as a starting point for your own project. All right, so let's talk about the project. Here's the final project requirements. Okay, so these requirements that I'm going to discuss, okay, my intention is that these requirements are fairly generic, and that they should be general enough that most of you should be able to implement something within the confines of these requirements. Okay, so I would hope that 80 to 90% of you will find that you'll be able to build something within these requirements. Now, if you find that that whatever you want to build doesn't neatly fit into these requirements, we are willing to work with you and maybe negotiate some features and say, well, okay, if you want to implement something else, some other feature, then okay, you can leave out some other feature, right? To as long as whatever you want to work on is comparable in complexity to what you're going to leave out in the project, then you'll be okay to implement that, right? But if you think your project already fits in within the confines of these requirements, you don't have to even ask for permission of what it is that you're going to be building, as long as you provide plenty of evidence that you have met all these requirements. Okay. All right. So let's go over the requirements. All right. So you will be required to implement at least the following pages. Okay. You'll need to implement a home, like a landing page, right? That you can navigate either, and it'll be mapped either to the slash, right, or /home, right? That you can decide that. You can have a preference, the slash or /home, and this page needs to be dynamic in that if we don't know who it is that is navigating here, it should display some anonymous content, meaning I don't know who you are, so I'm going to generate some dynamic content that everybody would see, right? Or everybody who is not currently logged in. But if I do know who you are because you have logged in recently and you navigate to your homepage, then it should display not only the anonymous content, but also the logged in content, right? It should maybe say, "Hi, Alice," right? If you logged in as Alice. And you know, if this is a movie application, it might be the latest movie that you commented on, or that you liked, or that you rated, or whatever, right? So logged in content and anonymous content. Anonymous content, even though it should not be static, it should be dynamic, in the sense that it should have, you know, some general information about the website, some historical information about the website, about maybe, you know, the latest person who just joined the website, or the latest blog post that was just posted, or the latest movie that was just liked, whatever, right? So anonymous, everybody sees the same thing, but it is dynamic, meaning that if I go once, if I go again, right, if I refresh, it should always display something, you know, slightly different over time, right? If something new has happened. So that's anonymous. And logged in is that something that's particular to me as a logged in person, right? And we'll learn, obviously, we're going to learn how to do all that, okay? All right, so from the home page, you can navigate to a search screen, right? And this search screen should be mapped to /search, okay? And /search is going to allow you to search for something, whatever it is that you choose, okay? And let's see. Now, this search should be available to anybody, whether you're logged in or you're not logged in. Doesn't matter, right? You should be able to navigate to the search screen. And here you can search, you know, if this is a movie application, then maybe you can search by the title of the movie or the genre of the movie, right? If this is a you know, a financial application, maybe you can search for stocks, okay? If this is a you know, a food application, maybe you can search for a meal or a dish, okay, or for ingredients. If this is a book application, then you can search for books. Whatever it is, you can search for something. Now, the search should be going against the third-party API. Okay, the third-party API should provide free access to that information. Okay, so let me just show you just one of them that is I find very useful. OMDB API. OMDB API, for instance, is a website that provides an API for accessing movies. Okay, and they have a free version and a paid version. I have a paid version. I pay for this service, and the way it works is that they give you, once you register, they give you a key that uniquely identifies you that you need to provide every time you do the query. And then you can also provide a title for a movie. You can search movies by title. You can search whether you want that you want them to include a long form for the plot. Right. So here's an example of a query. Okay. So notice that at the end of the URL, I am putting $S. Okay. S stands for a search term, I guess. It's a search term. And you can provide the title of the movie to search for. And I'm putting here Batman. See that? And I'm also providing my personal key. If I enter that, it comes back with data. See that? It comes back with an object. That it's formatted in a JSON format, meaning it's ready or available so that you can easily parse through this data using JavaScript. Okay, so it's an object that has three properties: search, total results, and whether the response was successful. It says how many movies and or titles meet your criteria of a Batman, and it gives you the first 10, the first 10 objects. So this can be used, for instance, so that you can display a maybe a results, okay, on your screen. It has the title of the movie, the year that it came out, the IMDb ID, a unique identifier, the type, whether it's a movie or TV series, and also has a link to a poster, right? And this poster can be used to render an image or thumbnail of the movie. Okay. Okay. So your API, whatever API you choose, needs to provide a feature like this, right? That you can provide some search term, right? If it's a financial institution application that you're building, maybe you can provide the stock ticker, right? And then it comes back with news about that stock ticker, or about the latest price for that stock, whatever, right? It comes back with some information about that. All right, so definitely a search, some kind of search capability, and it comes back with an array, with some array or collection of objects that provide some summary information about what the results are. Okay, so that's one of the requirements for the API. The second requirement is that your API should also allow you to ask for more detailed information about one of the objects that you see here, right? For instance, this IMDb here can be used for doing a subsequent query and asking more details about the Batman, right? The Batman Begins. So for instance, if I copy this and I change this to be, instead of S, I change this to be I and provide the ID, right? It comes back with another object, okay? That this is much more detailed information about this one movie, okay? And here's the full title, rating, the release, when it was released, runtime, the director, the writer, the actors. It has a plot. You can ask for a longer plot. You can have any awards. You have the ratings from the IMDb rating, Rotten Tomatoes, Metacritic. So a lot more detailed information, right, that can be used for rendering like a details screen about that movie. Okay, so this is just one of these APIs, and each API is completely different, right? Some APIs allow you to, the formatting on how is it that you provide your query is different from one API to the other, right? So there's no standard. Okay. Now, a nice place, one place that you can search for this, definitely on Google, you can just search, for whatever topic that interests you. You can search for, weather API, whatever, I don't know. So there it is. So there's a Meteomatics API, there's Climate Cell API, or maybe financial data API, right? So there's play.com API, there's Invests Udl API, or maybe there's food. Okay, so food recipe API, right? There's top 10 best APIs, Spoonacular recipe search API. There's tons of these APIs. Okay, so you can totally search for this on Google, or there are some websites, Programmable Web. Okay, Programmable Web is a website that curates APIs, right? It keeps track of many APIs that are out there. Some of them free, some of them paid for, and you can search here for the different APIs that interest you. Maybe art, right? And so, is it searching? Maybe not. Oh, there it is. Art Institute of Chicago. There is ASCII art. There's art clinic. There's art in Holland, Tokyo art, Harvard Art Museum API. Any topic that you can possibly think, right? There is an API for it, right? That can give you access to data that you can ask for. You can then query it, and then this data you can then use it to embed or integrate into your application. Make sense? So that's one of the main requirements from this from the website. You being able to query and integrate with an API out there. Some APIs are easier than others. Some of them can be accessed through the website, like I just did. Some of them need to go through a server, right? So those are a little more complicated. So I would explore that as soon as possible, right? And make sure that this is going to meet your requirement. Okay, let's go back here. So the search needs to search in, from a third-party API. That's a question on the chat. If we're interested in a paid API, will the college provide us with its credentials? No. This is entirely yours. Most APIs will provide a free tier that will have some limitations. For instance, it won't let you do more than 100 queries per day, something like that, right? So that means that at the end of the day, if you go over that limit, right, it stops there. Or it will not give you more than 10 results per query. Okay, so most APIs will give you a free version that allows you to test the API, play around with it, and they will try to entice you to get the paid version. Some of them will be, especially if it's a financial API, they will provide with data, but maybe with a delay, right? Maybe they'll provide the price of stocks maybe an hour ago, right? But they won't provide you with real-time data, and that's totally fine. Right? That's not what we're, that's not what you're being graded on. You're being graded on being able to integrate with the third-party API. Okay, good. So the search screen will have some kind of form that you can fill out. Whether, again, this will depend on you. And then when you search, the results will be listed down below. This could be laid out maybe in a tabular format, or maybe in a grid. Maybe these are products that you're looking for. Maybe these are books, and you might display them as a grid, as a table, any which way you want. It should be some kind of summarized result set, right? Where you might see maybe the cover of the book, the title of the book, and that's it, right? And then when you click on any one of those books or movies or sports teams or recipes, it then goes into a detail screen. Now the detail screen, again, this detail screen will be dynamic and also accessible to anyone who's either logged in or not, right? And this will also, the data that coming from here half of it should at least come from the remote API, right? So for instance, I want to know more information about this specific movie. So with the ID, right, some unique identifier for that particular movie, it'll go out to the cloud and retrieve that data, and will render the content here. Maybe lots of poster images about a movie, or maybe lots of photos for a recipe of a particular dish, right? Or about houses that are for rent, lots of pictures about houses or boats that are for rent, or whatever it is. Okay, whatever domain you choose to go with. Okay, so yeah, I said that some of the information will come from the cloud, and the other half, the other part of the information will come from your own database. Okay, if you have information about that particular object, if you have information in your local database, you might render it here. So for instance, I might see that other users in the community that are using your application, when they visited a particular movie, they might have left a comment, or they might have left a thumbs up or thumbs down, or maybe a rating or something, right? They might have bookmarked the movie. Well, anybody who has had interaction with that particular object, that needs to be stored in your own database, okay? And we'll talk about that, how to do that, right? So down below here should be any information that you have in your local database about that specific object, right? Maybe, again, if it's a movie, or it could be a review of that movie that some other user might have made about that particular movie, and so that would be listed here. So this page is going to be a merge of data that is coming from the cloud and data that is coming from your own database. Okay. Now the users that might have created this content, right? You should provide maybe the username of the person who created that content. Who liked this movie, or who hated this movie, or who left a review for this movie, or whatever it is, right? And if you do click on that person, right, it should navigate you to that person's profile. Okay, so there should be a profile page, right, that is specific to an individual that belongs to this community that is using this application. So I can navigate to somebody's profile. Okay, and that profile screen will have a mixture of information that is public, right, and some information that is private, right? So the private information should not be available to the person who is visiting your profile, right? And anything that is public, it should be available. And whatever's public, whatever's private, that's up to you to decide. You know, what you decide is public and what is private. What's the difference between DID and UID? DID. Oh, I meant UID as in user ID, and this is detail ID. It's some unique identifier that uniquely identifies the object or the user. Okay, so. Okay, thanks. Okay, so notice that this profile is mapped to the URL /profile/user ID. Okay, that means that someone is visiting your profile, right? Meaning this is not their profile, right? This could be some anonymous person who is visiting and just going through randomly visiting all the website, and they are visiting somebody's profile. And the ID of the person who they're visiting is part of the URL. Okay. Now, if you have logged in, all right, let's talk about login. If you log in, right, and that, well, there's a login and there's a registration, right, that allows you to either register if you're a brand new user. See on the chat. Can two or more teams end up having the same topic? Yes, but you can have everybody doing a movie application, and that's fine. Yes, you can have the same topic. So yeah, so there should be a website, a page that allows you to register and become a user and join the community. And then another screen that should allow you to log in and identify you after you've logged in. Once you have logged in or registered or logged in, you will have access to your own profile, right? And notice that your profile is not going to have encoded the ID, your ID, right? And so the browser and the server need to work together, right, to know who this person is, that it's you, okay? And we'll talk about that. How is that, you know, session information can be maintained on the server side or the client side to identify and log in people into the application. But yeah, your profile should not have the ID in there, okay? But if you're navigating to somebody else's profile, then yes, the ID of the person who you're visiting should be part of that, okay? So if you are visiting your own profile, then you can see obviously you can see the public details of your profile, but you can also see the private parts, right, of your profile, right? So for instance, you might not want to share your email or your phone number, right? So all that you might configure to be private, and no one can see that if not you, right? You can see your own private information, okay? Whether you are in your own profile or you're visiting somebody else's profile, there should be a portion of that profile that contains lists, one list or multiple lists of the things that each person is associated with, right? So for instance, if I had liked a movie, or I had left a comment on a movie, or I had bookmarked a movie, or I'm following somebody, or somebody's following me, anything that I am related to, somehow related to other people, related to other objects, or any records in the database that me as a person am related to, there should be a section in the profile that renders all the relationships that I have with anything else that might be stored in the database, okay? So for instance, I might be following folks, right? People of interest, or some folks might be following me. Well, there should be a list of the people that I'm following and a list of people that are following me. You know, if I have written a comment on a movie, then there should be a list of all the movies that I have commented on, right? If I liked a movie, then there should be a list of all the movies that I've liked, right? And all those lists should allow me to navigate. They should allow me to navigate back to the things that I am related to. Okay, so if I am related to a person because they are following me or I am following them, well, they should allow me to navigate to that person's profile. See that? Right? Or if I had left a comment on a movie, well, there should be a link that should allow me to navigate to the details page of that movie that I commented at, right? And I should be able to see my comments right there of that movie. That makes sense? If I navigate to somebody else's profile, I should be able to see their lists, right? I should be able to see the people that they are following, right? Or the people that are following them. I should be able to see the movies they like. I can see the movies that they have commented on, right? And those lists, right, should allow me to navigate to other people, right? Or navigate to other details, right? Should allow me to navigate to other details of the movies that they like. Okay, that makes sense? Right? No, so most of this information, the profile, right, all this, and maybe even the home, right, a lot of that information should come from your local database, okay? Whereas most of the content in the search should come from the remote database, so from some remote API that you're retrieving, and the details should be kind of a mix, right? You know, maybe half of the content comes from the cloud, and the other half might come from all the people and all the articles and all the reviews and the thumbs up, thumbs down, and the whatever, right? All rendered here in the second half of the content of the details. Okay. Anyway, so that's the overarching description of the assignment. Okay, that's the 25 words or less of these of what this looks like. Okay, let's go into more details on the requirements. Okay, this is something we had folks work on last semester. I'm not sure if we're going to be doing this again this semester. It's usually I bring in a speaker, a guest speaker that talks about security or talks about privacy and talks about all sorts of things. I'm not sure we're going to do this this semester. They have not contacted me and haven't responded yet. We might do it, we might not do it. So I'm going to leave it in here, but we haven't made a decision yet whether we're going to do this policy page yet. All right, so you can ignore it for now. Right. All right. So now we're going to go into more in-depth details on each one of the requirements. So for the home screen. Okay, the requirements are as follows, right? It needs to be mapped to either / or /home. It needs to be the very first page that you visit. It needs to be very generic content if you are anonymous and you haven't logged in, or it needs to be detail for if you log in, right? So basically, what I just discussed, right? What I just described for the home page, right? It's listed here formally that it must do this, it must do that, it must do this. All these things are listed here very clearly. Okay, for the profile screen, basically the same thing that I mentioned, right? The map to profile ID, that it has to have lists. So again, these are very clearly listed here that it must do this, must do that, right? And there will be a rubric, and for each one of these points will be part of the rubric, right? So at the end of the semester, we're going to give you a form that you need to fill out, and for each one of these points, we're going to ask you for you to fill out a description on how myself or the TAs are, how can we test and verify that you have met this particular requirement. And in there, your team is going to write, detailed steps, right, on how is it that we can verify, using your application, how can we verify that, that's mapped to profile, that it has some, personal or private information, whether you're logged in or not, right? So you'll tell us exactly how to do it. Also, the search and search results page, these are the requirements for that page. Again, most of what I just discussed. Okay, the details page requirements, the login and the registration, right? The privacy policy, this is optional for now. Again, I haven't discussed this with the other faculty if we are going to do this. And so for now, ignore it. I'll let you know a little later, see if we're going to do it or not. And it usually takes just a single lecture for a presentation, and then we ask you to write an additional page. All right, so styling. Styling, obviously the page, the website needs to be responsive, meaning that it should be usable on the desktop browser just as much as on a phone, okay? And the TAs are gonna check for this, right? They're gonna visit your website either on the desktop or they're gonna be accessing through a tablet or a phone, right? And so it should be responsive, right? With widths that take into account the width of the browser. Elements should not overlap, right? As the screen gets smaller, right, and things get squished, right, it shouldn't be the case that an element ends up on top of the other, right? Also, you have to make sure that as the screen gets smaller and things start to wrap, right, because they don't fit, that wrap looks nice and it transitions well, right? Not that it overlaps, right, and then all of a sudden it wraps, right? So it needs to wrap nicely. Also, it needs to look like an intentional wrap, right? Not that you just forgot and you didn't check to see if the wrapping looked good, right? Anyway, so definitely no double scroll bars, right? No scroll bar within a scroll bar. Definitely no vertical scroll bars. Definitely maybe a horizontal, vertical scroll bar, yes. No horizontal scroll bars, unless it is intentional, right? For instance, if you are scrolling through a very long table, right, that doesn't fit on a small screen, that's fine, right? You can scroll through the table, or maybe a large image that you're zooming in, right, and you're scrolling and moving the image around, that's fine, right? But it doesn't mean that the whole page should be scrollable, right? For instance, if the table is scrollable, the page should not be scrollable. You can scroll the page, but the table, but the page stays still, right? So we'll talk about how to achieve all that thing. Bootstrap allows you to do all those things. CSS libraries, you're welcome to use Bootstrap libraries and other libraries as well. And so, if you find a nice CSS styling sheet that you can borrow, or even if you want to pay for it, that is going to make your website look spectacular, go ahead. Right, all bets are off. You can make you should strive to make your website as pretty and spectacular as possible, right? So the intention here is that you should have at the end of the semester at least 2 projects that you can show to potential employers, right? And said, hey, look at what I built, right? We built this online learning management system. Look how pretty it is. You can do this, that, and the other. And look at this other project that we worked together in a team, right? You can show off, right? And then be very, very proud of what you build. And you can describe it that, yeah, we use the latest techniques, the bleeding edge libraries and industry standards, best practices, and you can sell yourself very well. Also, white spacing, obviously, right? That things are nicely have padding all around, right? That things are not flush with the screen. That there's consistency, right? That there's the same padding all around. There's a nice even spacing between the content, right? That you don't use some jarring color scheme. That there's good contrast. That you don't have like white on white or black on black, right? Or very dark gray on top of black, and you can't read it. So those kinds of things, we are gonna look for those things, right? Navigation should be clear. It should be understandable. If you go to a website, if you go to a page, it should be very, very clear. What buttons are available and where can I go from wherever page I'm in, right? So buttons should be nice and large and should be obvious. What I can click and navigate to next. Or if I want to go back to where I was before, right, there should be a nice way to undo or go back to a previous state, right? If I get stuck somewhere, right? All right, consistency, user experience, okay. Architectural requirements. So yeah, make sure that we're using a model view controller, that you are maintaining state, right? All that you're following a a naming convention, right? That you are following an appropriate file structure, right? So that the project needs to be well organized, right? That it has to have a well thought out structure. User requirements. So user requirements is that you should have at least let's see, I think 2 users. Yes, 2 users. At least 2 distinct types of users. Okay, and human users. At least 2 distinct human users, right? That there has to be something that one user can do, but not the other, right? Let's see, something in the chat. How many group projects do we need to work on? How many group projects? Only one. Only one group project. Can 2 or more teams? There's only one group project, and it's due at the end of the semester. Right. So there has to be at least 2 human users that are distinct. Right. So for instance, you can have, here's an example. It could be the seller and a buyer. Okay. Or maybe it's a project management software, right? So you have developers, you have QA engineers, you have project managers, you have business analysts, right? Each one with distinct roles and the things that they can do. How many individual projects do we need to work on? 1. Only 1 project together with a team, and then 1 project that we're working together, the assignments, right? So the assignments, there's 8 assignments. Consists of building something, right? With my help, and throughout the assignments, you'll end up at the end of the semester with a working application, okay, that you would have built through 8 or 9 multiple assignments, right? That build on each other. That you're going to do on your own, but with my help, with the code that I provide for you every week, right? I'll give you starting code, and then for that week you will try to complete it on your own, right? And at the end of the semester you'll have that application up and running, and that's the online learning management system, right? That's what everybody's is working on, the same thing, right? But on their own version, with my starting code. And then there is the final project that you work together with your team. With your team, you decide what it is that you want to build, and that's what we're describing now. Yes, only 1 project. If you're building a restaurant application, then there might be cooks and waiters, right? If it's a sports, you might have a player, a coach, a fan. Do I have to use your starting code in each assignment? No, you don't. Yeah, my code is entirely optional. You are welcome to use all of it or none of it. Right, you can use it as an example on how you would achieve it, but obviously, right, my code will strive to meet the requirements of the assignments, right? And also the structure and the naming conventions and things like that, which are required for the assignment. I might make some shortcuts, right? So, for instance, I might name a file wrong. Right, not following the naming convention, but I will let you know and suggest that you follow the assignment, in a proper naming convention. Okay. Okay, so at least 2 users, at least 2 distinct users. There has to be. Now, users can share certain things that they can both do, like they both can log in, they can both register, right? They can both have a profile page. But there has to be something that one person can do, and the other one cannot do, right? That are distinct. You also need to have an anonymous user, meaning somebody who has not logged in. You don't know who they are, but they still can use the website quite a bit. Okay. Now each user needs to be able to do at least 4 operations. Each user needs to do at least 4 operations, right? They need to be able to create something, right? They need to be able to read some data, right? They need to be able to update some data. They need to be able to delete something, right? It doesn't matter what it is, right? And it doesn't have to be the same thing, right? So for instance, The way I would delete, say I write a review about a movie. That is an example of being able to create something. I created a review. Or if I liked something, I make a thumbs up. That is a writing to the database, right? That's a creating something. Say I want to unlike something, or maybe I want to delete a post that I made earlier. That's an example of a delete, okay? Or an update. Maybe I misspelled something, or maybe I use wrong language, right? I should be able to update my review, right? Read is, if I search something, right, and I can look at movies and I can read somebody else's review, I can read something. Now, it's up to you what it is that each user can create, read, update, and delete, okay? Does the website admin count as a role? Yes. Yeah, that usually is one of the easiest roles that you can create, okay? An admin role, and then another user. Right, so each user needs to be able to do a specific set of CRUD operations: create, read, update, and delete. Web services, right? Your services, you need to be able to communicate between the browser and the server, and we're asking you to follow RESTful Web Service API conventions. We're going to show you how to build that, I think, on week number 4 or 5, I think. And then again on week number 10, maybe we're going to revisit that again, and so we'll build RESTful APIs here. So you have to follow that naming standard. Database requirements. Obviously, you have to have a database, and you're free to choose whether you want to create a relational database or a non-relational database. We're going to be covering MySQL for the relational database, and we're going to be covering MongoDB for the non-relational database, but you are free to use whatever database you want. Right? You don't have to use these databases. If you want to use Firebase because maybe you used it in co-op, whatever, feel free to use other databases as well. Data model. Each data model that you create, right? That whether it's want to be able to retrieve all the movies or update a movie or delete a movie. Right, you need each data model should implement these operations at least that you need. They should allow you to be able to create the whatever object, retrieve one or retrieve all, maybe a collection of things, or retrieve them by some predicate, right? Or update or delete. The complexity of the data model that you're going to be building, you have to have at least 2 domain objects. Right, domain objects. Now, I get a lot of questions of what is a domain object. So a domain object is an object that is specific to the topic that you choose. Okay, so for instance, say you choose a financial application. So objects that are common in a financial application would be what? A stock, it may be a portfolio. Okay, so those are objects that are specific to that topic. Yes? So that's what I refer to as a domain object, right? An object that is specific to that domain or that topic, right? Or if it's a movie, if I'm building an application about movies, then a movie is definitely a domain object, right? And I might have also in there maybe a playlist that has a collection of movies. Okay, so that's also specific to my domain. Okay, so you have to identify at least 2 domain objects for your project. Okay, so at least 2 user models, right? So a user, again, it might be a buyer, a seller, it might be a faculty and a student, right? You have to have at least one-to-many relationship. A one-to-many relationship means that you have to have at least one relationship between these objects that is one-to-many. Meaning, for instance, I might have one playlist can have many movies, or one playlist can have many songs. So that's a one-to-many relationship. Okay. Or a many-to-many, at least one many-to-many relationship. Right? For instance, you might have actors and you have movies. So one actor can be in many movies, and one movie can have many actors. So you have to have at least one relationship that is a many-to-many relationship. Okay. At least one, if you're using non-relational databases. Actually, I think I'm going to remove this. I'm going to remove that. This is just a couple examples of some UML class diagrams that capture some of these ideas. So here's a user-to-domain object. When I talk about domain object, I also am talking about non-human objects, right? So a user is not a domain object, right? A user is not specific to the topic of movies or blogs or financials, right? Or education. Users are everywhere, right? Any topic. But domains, objects, are specific to that particular thing, okay? UML diagrams. External web API requirements. Yes, you have to identify, you have to find one API where it provides data from the cloud that you can use in your application. And programmable web is a nice place that you can use to find those APIs. And I think that's it. Obviously, this needs to be hosted on Heroku, right, or some service provider online. It needs to run online on some service provider. It can be used. Heroku, I think, is one of the easiest one, but if you prefer to do it on AWS, then that's fine, or any other provider. All right, that's it. That's the project, the final project. So to clarify, if we have some sort of database, we don't need to utilize, no, absolutely you need both, right? So the API, it has cloud information, right? That they own the information. They have a list of all the movies, of all the books, of all blah, 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 whatever. Your database is empty, has nothing. Okay, your database at will have in your database, you would have things such as the people that have registered in your website, and that you'll have things such as any reviews that you might have written about a movie, any who likes what movie, who's following who. All that would be stored in your database. Okay, but the actual data of the movies or recipes or sports teams or financial data, right? That is always going to live in a remote API. Now, you might make a copy or small copy of the information locally on your database, right? For performance purposes. For instance, if somebody goes in and likes a whole bunch of movies, right? I search a whole bunch of movies and I like, Avatar, I like Titanic, I like Aliens, and I have a thing for James Cameron, right? And I like all his movies, right? And I have listed here, 5-6 movies that I like from James Cameron, right? It would be very expensive if every time I need to list these 5 movies that I would have to go fetch all this data from a remote server, from a remote database, right? Instead, I might copy and make records in my local database about and keep track maybe of the title of the movie. I might keep track maybe of the poster image of the movie, so that I can very quickly retrieve that from my local database and render a list of all the movies that I like. Okay, then if I click on a particular movie and I go back to the details, here I would go again. I would go fetch all the details, the plot, the directors, the cast, all that good stuff I would retrieve from the remote database. Make sense? So in that sense, we are integrating and we're caching some information locally, right, only for performance purposes. All right. Any other question? All right, good. Let's get started on some of the content that I did want to cover today. All right, some of this is going to be some review, and so I'm going to skip over some things I already covered when I was demoing some of this, and when we were talking when we were demoing the assignments. So let's talk about HTML. Again, some of this will be review, and I will skip anything that we might have already talked about. All right, let's see, HTML. All right, so what does HTML stand for, right? It's a hypertext markup language, right? It allows me to take any piece of text, right? And then add what we call tags around that text, so I can add layout, right? I can add some styling. I can add some information on how the browser is going to render that content. So definitely we know that. So you can just type in plain text, and then you can convert it into a layout of that text, add some styling, and also you can convert it also into hypertext, like hyperlinks that allow you to navigate between pages. Yes, creating a page, right? It's basically just creating a static ASCII file that has the extension .html, and you can just put some text in there. And then you can start adding some content. So one of the things that you can add are comments, right? We talked about that in class. It could be a single line or it could be multiple lines, right? And you use these escape sequence to make it a comment. All HTML is contains the following types of tags. You have an opening, you have a doc type that says this is HTML and the version of the HTML. You have an opening HTML that closes with this HTML that says that this is the parent root tag, right? That contains the content of the page, right? And in there, then you have a head and a body. Those are the two children of the HTML tag. The head is mostly for meta information, things that are not going to be rendered on the screen, but it allows you to establish relationships between this document and other documents. So for instance, it allows me to load scripts. It allows me to load any styling sheets. It allows me to establish, record who the author of the document is, things like that. It allows me to establish any dependencies of this document with other documents. The actual content, the main content of this page is inside of the body tag, right? And we've done that already plenty. Then doc type, we already took a look at doc type, right? It allows me to declare that this document is HTML, so the browser knows how to render this the content here, right? Then we have the HTML tag that provides the root. Right, HTML is based on XML, right? It's just HTML is just a dialect, right, or it's a specific vocabulary that of an XML document, right? That a vocabulary is a list of words, right? That's exactly what it is, right? When the vocabulary of a language that you're speaking, right? It's the list of all the words that you might find in a dictionary. So the vocabulary for HTML is HTML, head, title, link, right? Those are all words in the HTML vocabulary. Okay, so the root, right? This is the parent of all HTML documents. Then you have the head, allows you to establish dependencies of this document with other documents. Also, it allows you to establish the title. See these tabs here? The tab that says HTML. And web dev and web dev final is because, right, in the title, somebody has written that content, HTML. Let's see if that's true. If we look at that HTML, I can look at the content, I can inspect, I can actually see the source of this HTML document that was downloaded from the website, from Canvas, and you can see the actual content. And if we look for title, lots of script. Let's see if we can find title. And find title. There it is. See that? There's a title tag there, and that's where this HTML comes from. Same thing, if you look for any other document, you'll find the title there. So you can change that title over here. This page has that title. Question in the chat. Is the assignment all forms has the same title? Course manager should be customized that for each form. Yeah, you can customize. I don't ask you to do it, but yeah, you're right. It should have its unique name on the title. Perfect. Excellent. Good point. It also here is it's allowing me to establish that this HTML document depends on that style sheet. The actual content is, thanks. Okay. The actual content is available in the body. So in the body, you put the actual content that gets rendered. And the white spaces, as I mentioned earlier, are ignored by the browser. So the browser ignores all these white spaces, right? It mushes everything together in one single line. But if you want styling, can you explain the syntax of the link tag? Sure. This says that this document that we're in, okay, depends on this file, meaning you have to load that other file so that you can interpret the content in this document, okay? And then you can establish the relationship that this document has with that other document. You're saying that this is what you're loading is a style sheet. You could load a whole bunch of other things, right? Mostly in our documents, what we're loading are style sheets. And that's what the browser should interpret this CSS as a style sheet. If it loads it as a style sheet, it knows that they'll say, I know, this is going to tell me how black or red or yellow something that I should paint my document. File or URL? Yes, well, this is a URL. Right? This is a URL that points to a document, a file, an actual file. And it could be a file that lives locally on the same file system, or this could live, halfway across the world, HTTP : / somewhere in, Europe, right? / styles.css. Okay, so it could live somewhere else in the world. It could live anywhere. Thank you, Kate. So definitely, it could be a URL, but at the end is an actual file that gets downloaded and then used to render the content. So anyway, so in the body, here is a comment, which is going to be ignored by the browser. And this is the main content. And notice that even though we have these spaces, that's going to be ignored, right? But it's useful for us human beings, if you add these white spaces so that it make it easier for everybody to read. So even though the browser is going to ignore it, you should still add them for developers to read it. But if you do want to style it and add that spacing, you can use things such as paragraph that add the additional vertical spacing, right, so that it is rendered correctly. Headings, we worked on headings, right? We use headings to make things bigger, right, and present new sections. Right, we have different sizes. This goes from H1 all the way to H6. H1 is the biggest one. H6 is the smallest one. And we used it to present different content. So for instance, we're going to say, we're going to present some HTML, and then we're going to talk about the paragraphs and the headings as we are describing all our content. Lists, we worked on lists, right, to present different content. We're using it to show hyperlinks, right, that render or connect us to other pages on the website. Browser ignores spaces. Yes, if an HTML file contains no spaces and the other one contains 50, would there be a difference in performance? Yes, right. So actually, the more spaces you have, the bigger your file is, and if it's a huge file, it could significantly impact the the download of the content, and especially if you're downloading JavaScript, and JavaScript might have lots of tabs, lots of new lines, right, or even CSS documents, right, where we might use all the tab for indenting and making it look pretty. So usually what we do is that we pass it through a post processor, right, that is going to strip out all those white spaces before deploying it to a website, right? We're not going to be doing that, but it's common that we do that to increase performance of downloading all this content over the web. You have ordered lists, OL, and you have unordered lists, right? Unordered lists. This is supposed to be UL, sorry. It's supposed to be UL unordered lists, and this is supposed to be bullets. Bullets. There we go. Bullets. Unordered lists. Okay. All right. Excellent. So let's keep going. Tables, right? We talked about tables, right? Where you have the outer table and then the inner T head and the T body. And the T head allows you to create headings like username, password, first name, last name, role, right? Those kinds of things. And then you can add in the body, you can add the each row for each data that you want to display, right? So for instance, here you have Alice, right? Wonderland student, then you're adding multiple rows, right? For the content that you are displaying in each row, right? You can also have input fields for when you're creating forms, right? So for instance, we have input fields here, right? That have the input tag, and then you have a unique identifier. You can also have the data type to be text, date, email, phone, right? There's tons of types. The default is text. So if you leave out the type attribute, then it'll be just an input field. Placeholder allows you to create kind of like a grayish, so to give a hint on what folks can type in there. But we already talked about that in when we talked about the profile. Chat, can you explain the form tag that you use in your example code? Actually, I did not use the form tag. I did not use the form tag, and actually we're not going to be using the form tag. The form tag is a tag that allows you to collect or group together multiple input fields of type date, of type text, and drop downs. You wrap them inside of a form, okay? And then that form, you can add a button to submit that to a server, right? And what that will do, when you click on that submit button, the browser will collect all the data that you filled out in the form, right? And then send that data over to the server, okay? Now, we're not gonna do that. We're not gonna do that. That's old school, right? What we're gonna be doing instead is that we're gonna be using JavaScript to do that instead. So do not use the form tag, okay? Not that there's anything wrong with the form tag, but it will easily get you in trouble, okay? And I know I'm going to get a lot of bugs and saying, oh, why is my form not working? And the first thing I'm going to tell you, are you using a form? And the first thing I'll tell, just replace that form with a div or something. So instead of a form, what we're going to be doing is we're using just a plain div. And we're going to be using JavaScript instead to collect the data, right? And then send it over to the server instead of using the form, okay? Is that okay to put empty labels to align a row with the row above, or is that a better way to do this? Is that okay to empty labels? Empty labels. Oh, you mean because we added some spacing, some column 3 or things like that? Yeah, sure. But you can also replace it with a plain div. It doesn't have to be a label, and that's perfectly fine. Yeah, that's perfectly fine. Buttons, right? So buttons can be of different types. In a form, a button can be considered, can be interpreted as a submit button, right? And that's where your problem is going to be, right? That if it submits the form to the server, right, it's going to refresh the page, and we don't want to do that, right? So let's stay away from the form tag, okay? Because yeah, we don't want to use, it could interpret the buttons as submit, right? So we've used buttons, right? They can render like this. It allows us to to listen for folks clicking on something, right? Checkboxes and radio buttons. So radio buttons allow you to provide a mutually exclusive set of options. That you might give multiple options. What is your favorite color, right? And then you list all the colors, and you can select just one of them. Or you can, if you have multiple colors that are your favorite, you might put them as checkboxes, and be able to select all your favorite colors in there, right? So we will be using this a little bit next week in the next assignment. We'll be using some of these components. Anchors allow you to create hyperlinks and navigate to different places, so that if you click that text, it allows you to replace the content with another content. So next week, we're going to be going over this user admin, right? We're going to be building a table that is going to have a form that is going to allow us to create multiple users, right? And delete users and update users. But that we're going to do that next week. All right, so I'm going to leave this for next week. We'll cover this in detail when we come back next Monday. All right, so let's move on to some CSS. Let's see, close that. Week 2. Now, some of this information we've already covered, right? So let's talk about CSS. All right, so CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and it's a language that allows folks to modify the look and feel of an HTML document. The A1 example code has the form tag. In the case I wasn't clear by example code, yeah, I should remove that form tag. It shouldn't be there. And the code that I provided does not have the form. If you do use the form, at least make sure that the button is not submit, right? It does not submit the form, or it doesn't have an action tag or an action attribute. All right, so the style sheets, the CSS, it allows you, it provides a language. It's a declarative language, right? That allows you to specify how something should look. All right, so for instance, here's an example of the language. The language is made up of multiple name value pairs, right? Where you give it a name and then the value of that name, right? So for instance, you can say that the color of this paragraph should be green, right? And you can use it in 3 different ways, right? The good, the bad, and the ugly. Okay, 3 different ways of doing it. The good is that styles should not live in the HTML document, right? Instead, they should live in a separate file that is can be accessed through the link tag. Okay, so this is the good, right? This is the way you should do it. That's the best practice. You can also do it inside of the HTML document, but inside of the style tag, and you can provide any number of stylings. And you can say, these are referred to as CSS rules that fire whenever these rules match anything in the content of the page. So for instance, this P over here pattern matches with elements in the document. And if it matches, what it'll do is that it will apply the following transformations, right? So for instance, what it'll do is going to try to align the text and center it, right? So this content over here would be aligned in center, okay? And you can provide any number of rules here and any number of transformations inside of that rule, right? And we'll play around with that in a minute. Or the worst you could do is put the styling right on the tag, right? So this is the worst, this is not so bad, right? And this is the best, right? This is what you should be doing, right? We should never see any of your code, any of your HTML having these 2 examples. So here's an example. I will use it because I'm special, but I will use it for didactical purposes, okay? Only because, you know, if I use the CSS styling, right, it'll just bloat the content, right? It'll make it hard to read. But nevertheless, here's a couple examples. Here are 3 paragraphs. And here we're applying for this paragraph, we're saying that the background color is equal to yellow. And this background color is blue. This background color is red. And there they are. Here's 3 paragraphs with the 3 different colors. Or what we could do instead, right, a better implementation of this, right, is to instead remove the style tag, the style attribute from the paragraph, okay? And instead, what we're going to do is declare a class. See that? This class So what this class does, right, it just binds this paragraph with this identifier. Then that identifier can be referenced either in a CSS file, or it can be referenced in the style tag. Here we go. See, we are referring to whoever has the class background yellow. I am referencing it here. See that? And this period, so this period over here, that means that I am pattern matching the class called background yellow. So this is red. Pattern match any element, any tag whose class is background yellow. There it is. And then apply the following styling transformations. Modify the background color, make it yellow. Okay, so I'm declaring a couple more here. Background blue, background red, color white. Okay, and these are, I can name them whatever I want, right? These can be whatever choice I want to use. There are some naming conventions that they should all be lowercase, for instance. Also, if it's multiple words, they should be separated by dashes. That's a very common naming convention. Okay, you can apply also multiple stylings, multiple rules applied to the same element. So for instance, this element paragraph has two classes applied to it. See that? One is making the background color red, and the other one is making the foreground color white. See that? So these two paragraphs are going to have the foreground color white, but the background of one of them is going to be blue, and the other one is going to be red. Make sense? Okay. Which is basically what we did here, right? We applied these stylings, right, and then we moved them out to a style sheet. So this is a little better than this over here, but this is the ultimate solution. The ultimate solution is that you apply the styles, but you do not use the style tag. Instead, you create a complete separate file called, say, style.css, right, that actually contains all the rules, okay? And then you link it from your HTML using the link tag. Does that make sense? Right? This is the best practice. This is what you should be doing in all your assignments and in the project, okay? And the TAs are going to be looking for this, right? That you are indeed applying all these best practices, okay? All right, so let's keep going. Let's look at some basic styling, some very simple styling attributes that we should all know by heart, okay? So one simple one is the color, right? The color property. You can change the color property by saying color and then blue. And then when you apply it to any tag, the content will be changed to that color blue, foreground color blue. So this text can be colored and styled. There it is. See, that's blue over here. Okay. Another one that you should know by heart is background dash color, right? And it does what you expect it. It changes the background of whatever it is applied to. And here we're changing it to yellow. Now these names here, these names yellow, blue, white, right? Those are very well-known colors in CSS. And there's a multitude of colors that are available. There's tons of them, but we're going to be using some of the more common ones. Red, yellow, green, gray. Now there's also light versions of that. You can say light yellow, light blue, light red, right? There's dark versions of these, right? And you don't have to memorize them. Just a few, maybe just the primary colors, and that's it. Chat. If we have multiple classes defined inside each other, like class for div and inside class for label, do we need to do something specific? Blah, blah, blah. Yes, we will talk about that. We'll talk about it in a minute. Okay, so other things that we might want to do for styling is it used to be before CSS. Well, yeah, before CSS, HTML had these tags. Well, they're still there, like the B tag and the I tag and the underline tag. They're still there, but you should not use them. Right? Instead, you should always use CSS. But nevertheless, this is how you used to make something bold, something italic, and something underlined, right? Instead, today, we use CSS to accomplish the same thing, right? So here, let's see, we have a paragraph, and this here, this text, this can be colored and styled, right? We are, here we're applying a span tag, right? So the span tag, it's kind of the opposite of the div tag, right? So the div tag that we talked about in our assignments, right? If you remember, it's a generic element or tag, right, that allows us to wrap content. And what it does is that it creates a logical grouping of that content, and then it applies vertical spacing, right? It just separates it from the rest of the content, and it separates it vertically, right? And so div allows you to logically group the content in the div. Span plays somewhat the same role, right? Of logically grouping content inside of the span, but it doesn't add the vertical spacing, right? That's the difference between span and div. Div adds the vertical spacing, it breaks a new line, right? Whereas span, again, same thing, you can group content inside, right? But then it doesn't, it allows the content to flow with the remaining of the content, right? So for instance, you might have this text can be colored and styled, blah, 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 and you want it to flow with the rest of the content, right? So the way we're doing that is that we are wrapping the content with a span and then applying the style where we are making the font weight bold. So today, instead of using B for bold, you can use instead the font weight. And this is bold, bolder, boldest. You can make it things really, really bold, right? Or you can give it a number on how bold something you want, right? And there's other styles. There's also underline. There's italic. There's all sorts of these stylings which we'll see that are all font related, right? Working with the font, you can also change the size of the font. You can also change whether you want a Courier or Arial or whatever you want. Okay, the box model. So the box model is very, very important. It establishes how the browser thinks about anything that you see on the screen. Anything that you see on the screen, right, is some real estate that the browser needed to compute of where to display things in your screen. So for instance, even this slideshow, right? We can take a look at, and we can inspect it, right? And we can have the inspector here. The inspector is going to be your new best friend, right? So the inspector, okay, the inspector, you can bring up the inspector by saying right-clicking and say inspect. See that? And it tells you the layout of your page. Right. So for instance, if you right click here, actually no, it's listening to my right clicks. Here's the body, right? In the body, okay, this is by Google, so Google might have. Okay, notice this div here. See that? If I hover over that div, notice that this highlights. See that? If I click on it, okay, and I scroll all the way down, you have the box model of that div. It says, right, that it has no margin, has no border, it has no padding, but it has a width and height of 858 pixels by 40 pixels. See that? Right? I can keep looking here. If I go down here, this div here, let's keep going. This div, let's see, this div here represents the bottom half of my document. Right? If I open that up, let's see, I have the editor, there's a table there, table body, a row. On the left-hand side, Google is using a table for layout. All right, so notice that the left-hand side of this table is this over here. It's highlighting it, right? And this bottom half is the right-hand side. So if I click on it, I can scroll all the way down, and again, we have sizing, and this TD over here. See, there's this left-hand side, and I can change the box model. I can change the the border or the padding. Okay, I can change the position. I can say that this is 100 pixels. I moved it off the screen. Too much. 0. Let's change it, and maybe this is just 10. So notice that I can move this. I can move this maybe 20, and it's moving this. It's moving it down. See that? I can change the border. I can say that I want a border of 5 pixels. 5 and 5 and 5. And Google might be doing some weird things and making sure that this doesn't happen. Anyway, I can change the how much space there is between the content and whatnot. Okay. And so the box model is used to if you have content, whatever that content is, you can change the padding, the border, and you can change the margins. Margin is the space that is around the content, like this, all around. This is the margin. See that? All this is margin, is what separates one piece of content from something else, right? Some spacing in between. Border is maybe this black line that you see all around. See this black line? That's the border, right? And that border can be, very thin. It could be very thick. Okay, it could be dotted. It could be, it could be bold, right? It could be solid. It could be dots, dash, dot, dash. There's all sorts of type of borders. Padding is the internal spacing, right? So for instance, after you have this box, right, the inner spacing between where, from the edge of the box and the actual content begins, right? That's called the padding. So notice that there's a padding all around, right? There's a padding all around, and I can control that. And then there's the actual content. So the content is the actual text, right? Or any images that might be in here. Make sense? Right? So the box model is very, very important, and we can totally control each one of those aspects. I just described that. Also, the browser uses two strategies to compute, right, where things are going to appear on the screen. Okay. So anything that you see displayed on the screen, right, on any web page, right, or here in Canvas, for instance, right, in Canvas, any content that you see, it follows two overarching strategies of defining, of calculating. The browser needs to calculate where to put all this content, right, all these boxes, all this content over here, right, and it uses two strategies. One is the block strategy, okay, block, and the other one is the inline strategy. Okay, block means that and some elements, like the paragraph and the heading and things like that, they behave like blocks, right? Whereas span, right, and the input fields and the buttons, they behave in the inline behavior. Okay, so let's talk about blocks. So block, the behavior of block is that is going to try to take up the entire width of the screen, right? And it's going to push aside any content, is going to push it down so that it'll add any vertical spacing. So the paragraph does that, the headings do that, right? The divs, they do that, okay? Whereas the inline elements, like the span, input buttons, right? They all behave like inline. Like regular text also behaves inline. It just flows from one word to the next, from left to right, right? So these words are all inline, right? And when there's no more space, like for instance, if there's no more space and the content is too small, it just wraps. See that? So these words are behaving in the inline layout. Make sense? Right, and so we're going to be using these two strategies, right, to lay out our content, right, and you can configure all that. So block, for instance, this block over here, that behaves as a this heading here behaves like a block, meaning it's going to take up the entire width of the screen, and then it's going to do a break and going to push the rest of the content down, right? So there's a spacing here. And that's what H1 does, right? It takes up the entire screen. Now, the words in the H1, all the words inside of the H1, they behave inline, right? But the H1 itself behaves as a block, right? So that's why there's a spacing in between here, right? But inside, they behave from left to right, and when there's no more space, it wraps, right? So paragraph, same thing. Paragraph behaves like a block, but the inside behaves like an inline, right? So all this paragraph, right? It's this one over here, right? You have all this text, so it's moving from left to right, okay, inline until it hits the right-hand side, and then it wraps. But notice, when it hits the closing of this paragraph, it adds a vertical spacing. That's the behavior of the block, all right? Span, notice that here we have span elements, and then we have render inline. See that? So even though we have this span elements is wrapped with span, notice that there's no vertical spacing that is added. See that? Span elements, this over here, span elements, just continues and flows in the same line as this render inline. See that? It just continues from left to right, right? And then it just ends at the end, and then it just wraps. And so input fields behave that way, buttons behave that way. There's a whole bunch of elements that behave inline. And we will introduce you as we use check boxes, radio buttons, they all behave inline. Okay, so let's add some color. Let's just play around with a couple of these things, right? So we have in the H1, we added the background yellow. Here we added blue, and this one we added red. Okay, and let's play around with some of this. So let's see. Let's play around, for instance, with the borders, right? So we can totally control everything about the box, right? We can control the borders, we can control the padding, we can control the margins. Let's play around with that. Okay, so we first paint a couple of these a color, and then we're going to start adding padding and margins and whatnot. Okay, so let's see. The first one we're going to play around with is let's see, in the red one here, right? The background red. We're going to add border. We can change the color of the border. We can change the width of the border. We can change the style of the border. Okay. So we're saying this span elements over here, which is red. The background is red. The border, we can change it to be 10 pixels wide. By default, the border is 0. There's no border whatsoever. You don't see any border, but you can make it thicker, right? Then you can specify the color of the border, and if you want it solid, there it is. See that? Solid. Okay. All right, excellent. So we did the border. Let's take a look at the margins. We can change the margins, right? So this paragraph over here, notice that the paragraph, before there was no space between the top and the bottom and from the left-hand side. Let's see, the question on the, so class is for something from a style sheet, and style is for something in HTML. Yes. Well, not quite, right? So style is, yes, style is definitely that you are applying the style right on the element, okay? Whereas class allows you to give it a name and then describe the styling elsewhere, either in a different file or in the style tag, okay? So yeah, so class is so that you can apply the style, you can name that style, right? And then define it elsewhere, and then use that style in multiple places, whereas a style, the style tag allows you to apply that style only to that element, right? And it's a bad practice in general. But I did want to make sure you understood that we are applying it only to that span, okay? All right, so notice that here there's no margin by default. The paragraph, by default, paragraphs already have some margin. Okay, so we're going to add some more margin, right? So we're going to take this blue here, which was this paragraph over here that we said blue, and let's add some margin. So let's here notice that now there's some margin on the left and some margin on the right. There's actually some margins all around. And the way we did that is that we called it margin and then colon 10 pixels. So we added a 10 pixel margin all around, no border and no padding, right? We did add some border down to these spans down here. And the green, we also added some margin 10. So you notice that these folks, right, they were closer together before, right? Notice that they were closer together, see that? And we added some margins, 10 pixel margins, so now it's farther away from the left-hand side, from the right-hand side, all around. So you can specify the margin, overall margin. So this specifies the margin all around, top, bottom, left, and right. Or you can specify the margin on a specific side, right? Only the right-hand side, only the left, only the top, only the bottom, or a combination of all of them. Let's see, chat. And if we decide on both, is there any conflict? Can you have, yeah, definitely you can have conflicts. Yeah, and there are some rules on how the conflicts are handled, right? Ideally, you would define it and implement it in such a way that there is no conflict. Is there any strict restriction based on usage of the tags? Like we cannot put image in span. No, you can put images in span as well. Yeah, they're only used for logical groupings, right? If you want to group them together, but you want it to behave still like an inline, or you want to group them together and you want it to behave like a block, right? So depending on how you want to lay it out. But no, you can put anything in there. So yeah, so margins, each one of these borders, margins, padding, they can all either be applied all around, right? Or they can be applied at a specific direction, right? Above, below, left, right. Let's see, there's a question on the chat. Was following on Yuya's question above. Was following up on Yuya, okay. All right, so let's keep going. So here's an example of padding. Notice that before this blue didn't have any padding, right? It was nice and it was flush with the border, right? With the container all around. Also notice that the span before it had no padding, right? So you can have either provide an overall padding, which will be the padding all around, right? Top, bottom, left, right. Or you can specify padding for a specific direction, only to the left, only on top of me, right? Notice that the bottom has no padding and the right has no padding. See that? And the values could be different. One could be 10 and the other could be 20. Okay. All right, so let's talk about size and position. How are we doing with time? Oops. All right, I think we are over time. Yeah, 4:30. All right, so could you please complete, take a look at the remainder of the slides. We'll come back to this next week and finish up this content, right, so that we could move forward. Okay. All right, any questions? Let's see. I think Vanessa was following up my question. Should we create a file to use CSS or just use Bootstrap for styling? Which one is recommended? So you should try and use both, right? So you would do a link from your Bootstrap, right? And if Bootstrap is all you need, then fine. But oftentimes you need to override the style because it's not exactly what you want. Maybe you don't like the rounded corners that Bootstrap provides. Maybe you want them more rounded, right, or less rounded, right? And the way you would do that is with your own CSS file. And ideally, what you would do is that you would load both. First, you would load the Bootstrap CSS file, and then you would load your own CSS file so that you can override anything that you don't like about the Bootstrap styling. Okay, we'll talk about that a little more when we come back. All right, awesome. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.